What's going on, guys? It's John DeYoung here, and today I want to talk to you about housing affordability. Over the last couple of years, we've seen some serious fluctuations in the housing markets, and many like to hold the property and economic cycles accountable for these fluctuations. But there has also been some significant regulator intervention that plays a role, and for a good reason. Home ownership runs deep in the veins of Australians. We take some serious pride in our patch of land, and by doing so, it brings a great sense of community and belonging. It makes us feel wealthier and provides security around that retirement stage of life. Taking a step back, housing affordability is basically how much we spend on housing in relation to everything else. When housing affordability increases, meaning it costs more to rent or own a home, we have less to spend on goods and services that stimulate the economy in more diverse ways. We've had some great property growth runs historically in Australia, mostly driven by population growth, a booming economy over the last 25 years, but more predominantly, the increase in the number of females coming into the workforce, meaning households now have double incomes to borrow against, giving them access to larger loan amounts they then use to bid up the price of their desired property. Moving forward, however, wage growth is essential to keep up with the current rate of housing affordability. With a higher income, we can afford more expensive properties. However, Australian housing prices have more than doubled since mid-1990s, and the wage growth has significantly slowed over the recent years, sitting just above 2% per annum. This is why we have the need for human intervention through the form of financial regulations and government policies. If housing affordability was to skyrocket or plummet out of control, there would be significantly less lifestyle and luxury spending, leading to lower economic activity and higher unemployment. There are a couple of elements that affect housing affordability, which in one form is just the price of property. Obviously, with lower priced housing and the same levels of income, we could afford to buy property in our desired locations with room to grow our families. However, this is where the cycle all begins, because majority of us want to live in those same locations. This is where supply and demand plays its role, which is our first element, because there's only a handful of hotspots we all want to live in, being either close to our CBDs, close to the water but not too far away from civilization, and finally, close to that like button so you can smash it to help out with the YouTube algorithm. As we've seen in places like Bondi, St Kilda and our cities, this generates a high demand for areas that only have limited supply of land. So when a desired property comes on the market, that demand drives its price to almost unaffordable levels. We try to counter this demand with more supply by building towers with smaller places to live in. The problem with building higher and smaller is that it's expensive, and because it's expensive, developers want to ensure that they get the best returns. So they build these tiny shoeboxes with 1 or 2 bedrooms, fitting in the maximum number of apartments they can into the building under those local council regulations. But remember, demand comes with many drivers. One is location, yes, which they've gotten right, but another is livability. It's hard to raise 3 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment that's now the only affordable dwelling in that area. So they cut out this big chunk of the working class between 25 and 55, who have high incomes that are ultimately the ones that drive the price for property. This creates an oversupply of apartments that only a subset of the population would be happy to and can afford to live in, pushing the rest of the population into the neighbouring suburbs where it's more affordable to live in larger houses. This, in turn, generally gentrifies that area, meaning new cafes, shops and restaurants pop up over time, slowly increasing the demand for that area further until it becomes unaffordable. And then we get pushed into the next neighbouring suburb and the cycle repeats itself again. Of course, most people don't buy their properties outright. We borrow money to purchase a property, which brings us to our second element, interest rates, which is how much we pay the banks to borrow that money. For the following example, let's think about our incomes as money coming in, and we use 30% of that money coming in for our housing costs in a 5% interest rate environment. As property prices increase over time, we're essentially borrowing more money to buy that more expensive property. And if interest rates remained at that 5% levels and wage growth isn't increasing at the same rate as property prices, more of that 30% of income goes towards paying the bank than actually paying down the mortgage, potentially pushing out the loan repayment terms. This is one of the main reasons why the RBA have recently brought down that cash rate, which in turn gets pushed onto these interest rates, meaning we can pay more of our mortgage down and less in interest towards the banks. This is, however, one of our biggest risks because the cash rate is kind of a one-size-fits-all in the economy. As an example, retirees might be relying on interest earned from large savings to live off in their retirement. So when interest rates come down, they're earning less interest from their savings and will have to spend that savings sooner than expected. This is why it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, because whether it goes up or down, it's good for some and bad for others. Finally, when the cash rate does come down, interest rates are still in the hands of the banks. They might choose not to pass on that full interest rate cut, keeping more of the profits to themselves. Funnily enough though, when the cash rate does go back up, they'll pass on that full increase as soon as they can. Serviceability is the last element we'll be talking about today. And prior to 2014, banks used to assess our serviceability very differently, where someone earning $80,000 a year could borrow something like $1 million. Don't hold me to these numbers exactly, it's just what I've been told, but essentially it was a lot easier to borrow more money back then. So when people have access to borrow more money in a competitive, egocentric environment, i.e. the property market, it forces them to spend that money, therefore driving the prices of property up. But since 2014, APRA has required that all lenders must assess loans using either the greater of a 7% serviceability rate or a 2% buffer on top of the actual loan rate. And this was great because it limited the amount individuals could borrow and stopped property investors purchasing multiple properties, reducing the overall demand in the market. This did take its toll eventually and had an impact on the market between 2017 and 2019. Because the market was already falling and access to money was quite tight, there was limited demand for people to take advantage and snap up these properties at a lower price. So on the 21st of May 2019, APRA removed these serviceability restraints as they believed it was no longer required. This is a relatively new market impactor. Previously, we haven't really seen a financial regulator implement something that significantly impacted the market like it did in 2017 to 2019. So we have to be very aware now of how APRA, the RBA and the government are feeling about the housing sector and the overall economy. I think APRA will step in again once consumer confidence has fully recovered and try and intervene before this new accessibility to borrow more money pushes housing prices far too forward. So all of these elements are essentially balancing acts and they're trying to moderate the prices of property. Housing affordability doesn't just impact people with mortgages, it also includes the rental market too. Rental increases impact how much of a tenant's income goes toward providing a roof over their head. So when property prices start increasing, there's a bit of a lag due to that 12-month lease, but eventually rental prices go up too. Supply and demand also have an impact here. And if there's demand to rent in a particular area with a short supply, people are happy to pay more for better quality properties in that area, pushing up those rental prices. But to make things even worse, platforms like Airbnb have made what used to be a typical rental property into now a mini hotel, taking away more of that supply available in the rental housing market. So why is housing affordability so important? Although some people are happy to be renters for the rest of their lives, it is less secure. They generally have to move more regularly. There's issues with making changes like painting a room or adding a split system, and you have to deal with rental managers to get anything fixed, or whenever they decide to come and do a random inspection. Increasing housing costs for renters makes it harder for them to save for a deposit to actually purchase a property. Back in the 1990s, it used to take about 6 years to save for a typical 20% deposit. Now it takes somewhere around 10 years, which means they're renting for longer periods and missing out on potential tax-free capital growth while trying to save. This creates a wealth divide between generations, as older households who already retain wealth in property increase their wealth further through compounding capital growth, while those still renting trying to save for a deposit fall behind due to inflation and property prices growing faster than they can actually save. This flows into intergeneration inequality, as the bank of mum and dad is now essential for the younger generation to get into their own property, creating an even larger wealth divide and purely dependent on the success of one's parents. Going back to my original statement about household economic spending, if more and more of our income is being consumed by housing costs, then we have less to spend and inject back into the economy, slowing economic growth and increasing unemployment. From one extreme to another, a significant drop in housing prices would cause some serious economic instability. We would feel less wealthy, start saving more and consuming less, having the same effect on the economy as an increase in housing costs. And this is why we can't let either happen dramatically, and finding that balance is the absolute key. A good potential future counter to housing affordability is new technology allowing us to spread out wider, and maybe shift some of that demand from our CBDs, because that's where the jobs are, to somewhere more affordable. For most, anything longer than an hour commute into work is considered undesirable, and why there is so much demand to be around our cities. With an increase in technology that allows us to work remotely, we can start to work from home or other smaller working hubs further out that require less commute time to get to. Or infrastructure spending into something like fast trains that could connect affordable areas to our CBDs. This would also cut commute times considerably. I want to know what you guys think about the future of housing affordability. Leave a comment down below. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation and property investing advice for your current situation. These videos are just my opinion and are general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. If you're keen for more content, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss a video. And until next time, happy house hunting.